Hey, this is Random Thoughts with Random Access. I'm Random Access, and these will be my Random Thoughts birthday edition. My birthday, not the birthday of the show. Uh, who knows when the show started, because it's been intermittent for years. But tonight, just thought I'd come to you. I'm going to be switching from the video format here. Turn off the camera and just go audio. So this is what I look like. I look like this the rest of the broadcast, but now I'm going strictly audio. So today is May 23rd, 2016. We're broadcasting live on YouTube and on Facebook. If you're on Facebook, you can link to the YouTube. You can click on the YouTube video and watch live. You can also see it in tape. And however you do that, if you are watching us live here, it's just shy of 8 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Go ahead and send us a tweet or a Facebook post, whichever you feel comfortable doing. Why am I doing this? It's just nonsense, really. I mentioned yesterday about starting a weight loss program, something I've never really done. And in fact, quite the opposite. 30 years of putting on 10 pounds a year has added up. So, start as an adult, put on 10 pounds a year for 30 years, and see how big you are. So that's now, doctors concerned. I've actually seen several doctors now with different things, a lot of health issues, nothing that can't be taken care of, apparently. So things that are being taken care of. So, I see a pulmonary specialist for breathing, especially sleep. So that's ongoing right now. I've done a couple of sleep studies to make sure that, one, verify that I definitely need a machine, and two, and that it's properly calibrated. Seen to heart doctor. I've done tomorrow. I've done the echocardiogram. So tomorrow I'll meet with the doctor and see what that is. Also, put me on some sort of antihistamine or an allergy type medicine for possible postnasal drip. It could be triggering a lot of coughing that I've been doing, but it's more likely than not. It's just the heart is, the lungs are pretty well constrained, maybe from the excess body. So when I lose weight, that'll free up my lungs and I'll be able to breathe easier. The early look at the heart was that it looks pretty good. So there's that cough from talking, just exhaustion from talking. Of course, there's the weight loss going on. I meet with the nutritionist. It's a couple of weeks before I meet with her again. It's maybe once a month. I'll meet with her as we do this thing, which is mostly cutting out carbohydrates and sugars. Mostly cutting out, but it's not all out. I don't think that's a realistic thing. But I really haven't had any bread in a couple of weeks. Or pasta. One day I had a little bit of Spanish rice. I was in the mood for something with a little flair, so went with some Spanish rice. But for the most part, carbohydrates and sugars are down to, I don't want to say zero, but single digits, whatever that means. Or more than 90% cut. So that's probably a good thing. Drinking lots of water. In fact, now you won't be able to see me do this. I'm gonna lean over and grab me a fresh water. Not being on video, you really can't see it, but maybe you can hear the water bottle. There we go. So, what is it I want to talk about tonight? Call this a birthday edition. Well, because it is my birthday. And what really birthdays signify to me? I don't even know. I didn't make a big deal about it. I don't make a big deal about it, although, it's on Facebook. So I got a lot of Facebook birthday wishes. So, appreciate all those. Thank you, everybody. Everybody hopefully got a personal thank you back on every one of those that was sent to me, rather than a group. It's just not me. I wouldn't feel comfortable saying, thank you, everybody who sent me a birthday wish. I figure if you send me an individual birthday wish, I could send you individual notification that I got it. Yeah, I understand some people get hundreds or thousands of them. Lucky for me, I'm not that popular, so it's a very easy to manageable number. And this is completely. Again, I did this without preparing anything. I promised yesterday that I was going to prepare something the next time I did one of these shows, rather than just sort of talk off the cuff. And perhaps I should have. One way I could do this is I could be like looking at my Twitter stream and see what kind of things are being tweeted. And actually, I have it's not my Twitter stream, not my main timeline, but a list I have. It's called SCI. So science, it's short for science. I didn't want to call my whole list science because it just takes too long for the most part. It's a lot of characters, Twitter, you got 160 characters. You don't want to waste any. I know for like George R.R. Martin, maybe 160 characters. That's not too many for him. But he's still willing to waste them. You see that with last night. All I can say is hold the door. Right? That's so. But it's an SCI list, so it's at random access is you can find me on Twitter at random access, and if you do at random access /SCI, you can see my Twitter list. It's about 500 people. I don't know any of them personally. Maybe one or two. As I should say, I don't know any of them. I mean, there might be a couple of them there that, and when I say personally, I mean people that I've had conversations with online. I don't know any of them in person, but a couple of them I know from just talking to them online. That's where I found them first. But the rest of them are just kind of science. People, STEM related fields, and it's just their Twitter feeds, so that you can, so I get a little different flavor. So rather than just seeing people I normally talk to on Twitter, who maybe share more like, I could be following them for any reason. These are people I don't necessarily follow, but I just have them in my list, and they tweet all kinds of interesting articles, news, sometimes funny comments. And it's just, it's their Twitter streams. I was a little bit like a voyeur looking in on their lives a little bit, but it's also, I find it a good source for, STEM-related articles and news, and what's going on with like NASA. I follow, of course, NASA, and a lot of the NASA missions now have their own Twitter accounts. Curiosity, sitting there on the surface of Mars, has a Twitter account. So, there's different things like that that are just fun. See what those things kind of are up to, and I'll just kind of scan through here. And see what kind of what I'm seeing here, and actually nothing is jumping out that anything that I want to talk about or feel like I need to talk about. It's all, hey, read it yourself. You want to learn about science, so you got to read it yourself. I am a big fan of science. I did work as a research scientist for a defense contractor for several years. And got to do some science work in industry, and it was a great experience. It was I learned a lot. I learned a lot about sort of doing science as a defense contractor versus doing science in a lab at school. It can be a much different thing. But in general, I'm a big fan of the scientific method. At least, when you think about with scientific method, what is a scientific method? And, you can write down whether, 6, 7, 8 steps of scientific method and things that you want to worry about. But really, when you think about it, And you could almost write your own scientific method, as long as you remember the key is you're doing everything you can to eliminate any sort of personal bias from the result. You want to make sure that, that's really that's about all it is. We have these, it starts out with a hypothesis, right? Actually, even before a hypothesis, like a pre-hypothesis stage where you kind of look at the world. Science is about describing the world. Ultimately, that's what you want to do. We want to model the universe in some way. Science is about something very real at the end of the day. It's not completely abstract like just mathematics. Mathematics would be like sort of pure, the purest form of science, because it doesn't have anything to do with reality. It's remove the reality and then do math, and then you're in a way you're kind of like doing the most pure of all sciences, right? That's very abstract. But so with that set aside, science is about describing the world, describing how we interact with the world, how we observe the world. It's about observing the universe, and it's trying to model that observation. It's trying to explain that observation. How do I explain what I see, and how can I use that now to predict what I will see under specific circumstances? That's what we'd like to be able to do with science, is be able to use it as a tool, and as a tool, we want to be able to make sure that we have predictable results given circumstances that we understand. So so it starts out with this pre-hypothesis, which is just kind of see what's going on around you. Open your eyes, open your ears, feel the universe, see the universe. And then even think about it a little bit and wonder and ask questions and wonder why something happens. Little kids are natural scientists. What little kid is not constantly asking questions about whatever's going on around them? That's what a scientist does, and we shouldn't shut that off in little kids, right? Little kids are kind of taught right away to, stop asking questions about what they see. Or kids will wonder about things. That's sort of the natural born philosopher, and kids do. They'll wonder about what they see. Maybe not necessarily asking directly scientific questions, but a lot of philosophical questions. And adults sometimes don't want to deal with that because kids are never ending. Why? And we should encourage them. We shouldn't necessarily stop them, but we should also encourage them to try and find their own answers too. This is one of the beauties of science, is we can all go out and find our own answers. And if we're really adhering to the scientific method, when we all come back together and we compare our answers, we all have the same answer or something very close. So we have a way of translating from one answer to the other in a way that makes sense. It's like, but the answers could be slightly different, because this is I should get my quotes out. In fact, I should get a list of quotes. There's wonderful quotes about science, and there's one, and the name escapes me. And if you know the name, go ahead and send us a message and let us know. But it's basically, and I see Schrodinger. I think it's Schrodinger, or Heisenberg. Maybe it's one of those two. It's one of these quantum mechanics guys, I'm pretty sure. And said science is this is what happens when you're not prepared. But it's the question. Our understanding of the universe is controlled mostly by the questions that we ask about the universe. If we ask different questions, then and we don't ask the right question. I don't want to say the right question, but depending on what kind of question you ask, that's going to control how you understand the universe. So a big part of science is asking the right question, that's kind of the next part here. Those pre-hypothesis stages, just experience the universe, just observe the universe, feel the universe, be part of the universe. Then start asking questions. And this is kind of the hypothesis stage. Or this is, directly follows from the hypothesis stage, where you kind of ask these questions and then kind of posit an answer. What, does this, would this happen if I did this? Would this happen if I did that? What would be the effect if I, those are kind of hypothesis type questions. And you want that to be informed a little bit by your experience with the universe. We want some sort of sense of plausibility. And, if you've seen something happen and you form a question about something that you've actually seen, felt, heard, then, then there's some, maybe you can start coming up with a plausible explanation. And then the hard part now is to take that question, that hypothesis, and figure out how to test it. And that's really where all the work in science is. I should say all the work. That's like the whole another half of the work. One, you got to be able to ask that really great question. But don't try to ask a great question, I guess I should say, is just start asking questions. And with experience, you'll learn to ask great questions. But you ask a question, and then you want to figure out a way to, either prove or disprove. You actually don't ever prove anything in science. I like to think of science as like, it's the art of proving yourself wrong. Right? Yeah, it's just kind of a little random excess, aphorism there. It's certainly not meant to be taken literally or anything. But if you think about it, what you want to try and do with your experiment and with your research in science is you don't want to leave any gaping holes or any, loopholes, so to speak. So you really want to kind of work against yourself into thinking, what are all the things that could go wrong here? What are the things that could happen that would interfere, that might possibly be a cause other than the one I've hypothesized? You want to think of all the other possible candidate things that go wrong. And one way you do all this stuff is you try to make use of control groups, is where as best you can. Short of doing human trials, you can almost always come up with a control group. Control groups in human trials it's very difficult and risky, and let's not put these people on medicine and see what happens to them. That's not real cool. Although it's been done. It's done in the U.S. Look up Tuskegee experiment. We went on for I want to say 40 years. To learn about syphilis. We didn't infect, at least we don't admit to infecting the Tuskegee people with syphilis. But what we did is we didn't treat them. We told them we were treating them, and we just wanted to see the progression of the disease through all its stages. And so in a sense, they were like a control group of like zero treatment. Here's what you get. And that's just, it's horrible beyond belief, and that's why we, control groups with human trials. You want to stay away from it. But I feel like I've read somewhere where the U.S. got involved somewhere in Central America, maybe I want to say Panama, where they actually took prisoners and actually did infect them. And maybe not syphilis, but we actually, infected them with certain diseases to see what would happen. Every day we use a prisoner. And this is going back, early 1900s, when all the craziness was going on with a lot of science and thinking about disease and thinking about, I guess people, after the age of enlightenment in industrialization, and we're seeing the fruits of science, and we thought, we could solve anything with science. And then people started doing things that were just not ethical. So that's one thing about science, where you do it, and it's sort of in the complete regimented, just abstract science, but not abstract mathematically, but using the scientific method. Ethics is not really part of it. I mean, that's something we have as humans we have to do. That's not really part of the scientific method itself. The scientific method is this thing that sort of exists outside of humans. It's a way of investigating questions so that you don't fool yourself. But we're humans. We live in a society. Maybe it's a global society now. I hope we're moving toward that. But Ethics are definitely a big part of science. We want to make sure that we're, not a big part of science, but it's an important partner of science. But getting back to the thing, you just don't want to fool yourself. I could talk forever about all the different types of cognitive bias that we have. Just I don't want to get into that right now. Let's just say that a big part is trying to figure out how to set up your experiment so that you kind of eliminate those bias. But then there's another part of science, which a lot of times is what gets left off, is well, this one not so much gets left off. This gets left off of pseudoscience, is the peer review. Peer review is this idea that somebody other than you, and actually more than one somebody is preferable, as many as reasonable as makes sense, to look over what you've done. Hey, if I were to do it, what do I, not if I were to do it, but, I look over what somebody does and then try to figure out, did they forget, did they fool themselves and not know it? Does it make sense what they did? This idea of peer review. And that's just like one of the steps of, because it's key not to fool yourself, is you want other people to look at it. Well, people who do a lot of pseudoscience type things, which, I won't talk about right now, but, we can imagine what they are. There's really not much peer review. It's really not independent peer review, because the person who's doing it is pretty sure they're right. What they're doing is they're doing work to prove themselves right, which, as I mentioned before, when you're really doing science, you're trying to prove yourself wrong. And then when you fail to prove yourself wrong, it's almost like you begrudgingly post your results saying, I couldn't do it. I couldn't prove myself wrong. This seems to be like the way it is. And that's a positive result in science. That's what actually gets published more. When you actually prove yourself wrong, a lot of times that doesn't get published, but it almost never does. But that's really important in science too. When you, think of when you posit a hypothesis and then you can, shoot it down, that negative result, that's good science. That's stuff that other people could use. They could, hey, okay, well, we've eliminated that possibility. Rather than just kind of it gets swept under the rug and nobody talks about it, and people don't really care, and you really don't get much credit as a scientist. I mean, it's like they're saying, it's like almost like you have to be able to come up with the stuff that is going to work a priori. Well, that's what pseudoscience really does. It comes up with something that it is sure is going to work, and then what it does is it looks for more evidence that it's working. Well, if you posit something that you think is happening and you look for evidence to support that it is happening, that is exactly what pseudoscience is. Real science is looking for the evidence that doesn't happen. Because what you're trying to shoot it down. If you're just looking to confirm something, then you've opened yourself up to all the biases. Because anything that you see that looks good for you, you're going to jump on. So you got a lot of confirmation bias. You just got a lot of, just all the different biases that go on. So when you're doing science versus pseudoscience, and that's a little bit of an oversimplification, but you can see where people do this. So when they're doing pseudoscience, they're constantly talking about the evidence that supports their hypothesis. And it's like, evidence in quotes. Is that really evidence? And why is all your experimenting, trying to support it? Where's the evidence that where you try to shoot it down? And so and so that happens. Okay, but that's not the only thing. It's not just peer review that's important. So you're trying not to fool yourself, and then you use peer review as kind of like an outside reality testing. Make sure that you're not fooling yourself by asking other people, and you shouldn't be asking people who are in any way involved with what you have done, because they're going to have a vested interest. You want somebody who's a dispassionate observer, who's also understands what you've done. Right here, you don't want to pick somebody who doesn't even know what you're doing and doesn't understand the experimental setup at all, or doesn't understand the statistics that you use. You want people who are well versed in what you are doing, sort of, can that word abstract, who are abstractly, aware of, that they could have done this experiment themselves if they wanted to. They have all the mental faculties for doing this experiment. Those are the kind of people you want to peer review it. And and but the one that gets missed out a lot now is at the end is the replication. Right? This is an important part of science. Science is not about one person does one experiment and it's all over and done with. You know, clap, wash your hands. You know, we're all done. We're out of here. No, 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 no. Replication is really important because that's another one that chips away at the bias, right? Because even if you've done everything you can to not be biased, you know, you have searched every nook and cranny. You have done everything. You know, this is the perfect experiment. You know, no. In fact, you know, the more sure you are that you're right about something in life, you know, probably the better chance is that you're never going to be able to admit that you're wrong, right? That's and no scientist should ever be in that position. Every scientist should say, hey, no matter what I believe, if you've shown me the evidence, I'm going to go with the evidence. So I don't want to ever be too sure about anything, and that's where replication comes in, and it's replication by somebody else, who's not taking advice from you necessarily. You don't want to get involved in their replication. You want them to sort of take their own independent path to investigate your hypothesis. I mean, they're going to start with your hypothesis, but they're going to take their own independent path to try and validate it or disprove it one way or the other. And that replication is really important, and not just one replications, but multiple replications. And that's when we start believing scientific results is it's when it's withstood peer review and then replication. Well, at least in theory, that's when it. But these days, funding the way it is, it's hard to get funding to do experiments that are going to replicate a result that's already positive. Who wants to pay for that? That's already happened. Why would I pay to replicate it? It's so important to replicate. It's so we have this, reality meets, the ideal. The ideal is that we do our experiments and we with equal enthusiasm publish our positive and negative results, and then the results are replicated, right? Especially the positive results are replicated. Negative results don't, not as big demand to replicate those. So maybe one or maybe somebody might just a second replication just to make sure that the negative result really did happen. But generally, if you get a negative result, you get a negative result. I mean, unless you really, really messed up something, if you're getting negative results, then whatever you thought was happening is not happening. That's kind of what a negative result is. But that should be looked at, I guess. But it's those positive ones, because what happens is you get the positive result, but you're still not sure if it was because of your hypothesis or some other confounding factors that you never even considered. And that's why replication is so important, because people will replicate it under different circumstances, perhaps, a different part of the world, a different time period. You did your experiment in 1920. I'm doing it in 1980. I might get a different result. Physics doesn't work that way. We shouldn't get a different result because we do it at a different time. You know what? Actually, we do. For the example I just gave, 1920 to 1980, because between those years, we exploded a lot of nuclear weapons in the world. There's a lot of extra radioactivity. There's a lot of things that did not exist in nature before the 1930s, before the 1940s. That all of a sudden now this is like a classic. Trying to, I hear about it a lot with art forgery, because we can find certain radioactive materials in the materials that were fabricated for creating the like in the paints kind of thing, where hey, if you find these radioactive materials in these paints, they weren't there before 1930, so they shouldn't be here in the painting. But now because we've the paints were manufactured after a certain time. They've got the radioactive isotopes in them that everything in the world has in it now, and so yeah, it's so I can't think of anything. I don't know if there's anything that's really happened, but but maybe something did happen in 1920, and that got a certain result. And if we do it now, and we get a little different result, and that's because of the you know just the radioactivity. Yeah, about that. Okay, so I just kind of want to end it there. I rambled long and hard, here. Probably went 30 minutes, and I didn't even really try, and it really didn't make any sense. So, but again, it's called Random Thoughts with Random Access. This is really just me talking. This is me experimenting tonight with using just audio. There was a short video introduction, so that you can see me. It was real. Yeah, it really is me. And then I switched it off, and what that does is that saves on my bandwidth here as I'm doing this live. Right, I'm not recording this offline and then uploading it. I'm actually recording this and at the same time sending it out over the airwaves, and so that's what it is. So this is the Random Thoughts with Random Access birthday edition. It's May 23rd, 2016, and I talked a lot about the this scientific method in general, just completely unprepared, off the cuff, and just something to do because now probably go back to watch some TV maybe. I mentioned Game of Thrones last night. Oh, hold the door. Oh, did I spoil that? I hope not. I will talk to you people later, and thanks a lot for listening. And good night, peace, courage. Now here I am, like making a peace sign here, like you guys can see me. I'm just a geek like that, I guess. I will talk to you guys later. Good night.